Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the corridors of time. Tonight, we venture into the ancient world of Rome, but not to the grand forums or mighty legions you might expect. Instead, we turn our attention to something far more intimate and, perhaps, more unsettling than any battlefield, the world of Roman children. As you settle into your comfortable space, surrounded by the safety and warmth of modernity, imagine for a moment a world where childhood as we know it simply did not exist, where the laughter of children was tempered by the weight of adult expectations, where tenderness was viewed as weakness, and where the very survival of a newborn depended not on natural right, but on the measured judgment of a father's approval. In the Rome of antiquity, children were not the cherished beings we know today, protected by law and wrapped in unconditional love. They were, instead, small adults in training malleable clay to be shaped by the harsh realities of Roman society. Their world was one of rigid hierarchy, unforgiving discipline, and an understanding that sentiment was a luxury the empire could not afford. Tonight, we will walk through the cobblestone streets of ancient Rome, past the modest insulae and grand domus, listening to the voices of children whose experiences would shock modern sensibilities. We will discover how these young Romans lived, learned, and struggled to find their place in a civilization that valued strength above all else. Allow yourself to drift back through the centuries, to a time when the Mediterranean was Rome's lake, and childhood was not a sanctuary, but a proving ground. Let us explore together why Roman childhood would indeed horrify modern parents, and perhaps, in understanding their world, we might better appreciate the gentler path our own children walk. Today, picture, if you will, a dimly lit room in a modest Roman home, the walls painted in muted ochres and reds, the air thick with the scent of olive oil lamps, and the lingering smoke of incense offered to the household gods. Here, in this intimate space, a drama unfolds that would be unthinkable in our modern world, the moment when a newborn's very right to exist hangs in the balance. You are witnessing what the Romans called the tolla liberos, the lifting of the child. A woman, exhausted from childbirth, lies upon a simple wooden bed, her newborn placed not in arms, but upon the cold stone floor before the households. Paterfamilias, the absolute ruler of this domestic realm. The father, draped in his toga, studies the infant with calculating eyes, examining the child as one might inspect a piece of pottery for cracks. The baby's fate depends entirely on this man's judgment. The robust, healthy child who cries with vigor might be lifted from the floor, acknowledged as a member of the family, but should the infant appear weak, deformed, or simply unwanted, perhaps another daughter when a son was desperately needed, the father might simply turn away, condemning the child to exposure on the hillsides outside the city walls. This is not cruelty in the Roman mind, but practicality. Resources are finite, and the empire demands strength. You can almost hear the father's internal calculations: another mouth to feed, another dowry to provide, another potential burden on the family's precarious economic stability. The decision is made with the same cold efficiency that built Rome's roads and conquered its enemies. Imagine yourself as that newborn, your entire future existence dependent not on some inherent right to life, but on your ability to appear worthy. In those first crucial moments, the warmth of your mother's womb is replaced not with loving arms, but with the stark reality of conditional acceptance. This is your introduction to Roman society, a world where love must be earned, where weakness is not tolerated, and where your very survival is a privilege granted by masculine authority. Should you be fortunate enough to pass this first test, you are named on the 8th day if you're a girl, the 9th if you're a boy, in a ceremony called the lustratio. But even this naming does not guarantee your place in the family. Roman law grants the paterfamilias the right to sell his children into slavery, to abandon them, or even to kill them if they bring shame upon the household. You exist at his pleasure, a possession more than a person, your childhood a temporary state to be endured rather than cherished. The Roman home into which you are reluctantly welcomed is not the child-centered environment we know today. Furniture is adult-sized. Decorations reflect adult tastes, and the rhythm of daily life revolves round adult concerns. Children adapt to this world rather than the world adapting to them. You learn quickly that your needs come after those of your elders, that your voice matters only when it speaks the words adults wish to hear from your earliest days. You are taught that displays of emotion are signs of weakness unsuitable for a citizen of Rome. Tears are discouraged, complaints are punished, and the natural exuberance of childhood is channeled into rigid disciplines. You watch as other children who fail to meet these standards simply disappear from the household, their absence explained away with euphemisms or not discussed at all. The gods who watch over your household offer no special protection for children. The lares and penates, the household deities whose small bronze figures observe from their shrine in the atrium, demand the same devotion from young and old alike. You learn to approach them with the same solemnity expected of adults, to pour the proper libations, to speak the ancient words without error. Childhood innocence is not an excuse for religious negligence. Your days begin before dawn, not with gentle wakening, but with the harsh reality of Roman discipline. The wooden shutters of your sleeping alcove are thrown open, flooding the space with the grey light of early morning. There is no time for the languid awakening that modern children enjoy. You must rise immediately, dress quickly in your simple tunic, and present yourself for the day's duties with the same efficiency expected of a Roman soldier. The breakfast you receive is sparse and practical, perhaps some bread dipped in wine, a few olives, a small portion of cheese if the family's circumstances permit. You eat in silence, standing, as sitting for meals is a luxury reserved for the evening cena. Your stomach may growl with hunger, but you have learned that complaints about food are met with swift punishment. Roman children eat what is provided, and are grateful for it, regardless of their natural appetites or preferences. Your education begins not with play or exploration, but with the memorization of laws, genealogies, and moral maxims. You recite the 12 tables, Rome's ancient legal code, until the words flow as naturally as breathing. Si pater filium te venam juit. Filius e pater liberesto. If a father sells his son 3 times, the son shall be free from the father. Even as a child, you learn the legal boundaries of your own powerlessness, the precise conditions under which you might one day claim independence from paternal authority. The streets of Rome through which you walk are not the safe playgrounds of modern childhood. They are dangerous thoroughfares where children must navigate carefully between racing carts, aggressive vendors, and the ever-present threat of kidnappers who steal children to sell in the slave markets. You learn to keep your eyes down, to speak only when spoken to, and to recognize the social hierarchies that govern every interaction when you witness public executions or gladiatorial games. You are expected to watch with the same stoic composure as adults. The sight of blood, the sounds of suffering, the spectacle of death, these are considered educational experiences that will prepare you for the harsh realities of Roman life. Your natural revulsion must be suppressed, your questions answered with clinical detachment. This is how Romans are forged, through exposure to the brutalities that softer civilizations attempt to hide from their young. The clothing you wear marks your status as clearly as any legal document. Your toga praetexta, with its distinctive purple border, identifies you as a fribon child, but also as a being not yet fully human in the eyes of the law. You cannot vote, cannot own property, cannot marry without permission. Your purple stripe is both a protection and a chain, marking you as deserving of certain considerations while simultaneously advertising your fundamental powerlessness to your toys, when you have them, are not the colorful plastic creations of modern childhood, but stark reminders of your future role. Wooden swords for boys, miniature looms for girls. Dice carved from the bones of animals, each plaything serves to reinforce the rigid gender roles and social expectations that will define your adult life. Even in play, you are training for the serious business of being Roman. The other children in your neighborhood are not necessarily friends, but competitors and potential threats. Friendships are formed along lines of social utility, alliances that serve family interests rather than personal affection. You learn to be suspicious of genuine emotion, to calculate the advantages of every relationship, to see even childhood companionship through the lens of political and economic advantage. As night falls and the oil lamps are lit throughout the house, you do not retire to a comfortable bedroom filled with comforting objects. Instead, you sleep on a simple pallet in a shared space, perhaps with siblings or household slaves. The darkness holds no magic for you, no gentle stories or lullabies. It is simply another time of vulnerability, another test of your ability to endure discomfort without complaint. This is your world as a Roman child, a place where love is conditional, where strength is the only valued currency, and where your very existence depends on your ability to prove your worth to those who hold power over you. Tomorrow will bring new tests, new opportunities to demonstrate your fitness for survival in an empire that has no patience for weakness, no tolerance for the gentle foolishness that we now recognize as the natural birthright of childhood. The sun rises over the 7 hills of Rome, casting long shadows through the narrow streets of the suburb. And with it comes the sound that defines Roman childhood more than any lullaby, the sharp crack of the frula, the split cane that serves as both teaching tool and instrument of correction. In the modest schoolroom scattered throughout the city, young Romans begin their daily education in a manner that would horrify modern parents, through systematic, methodical, and socially accepted violence. Picture yourself at 6 years of age, walking through the pre-dawn darkness toward the house of your magister. Your pedagogue is a slave whose duty it is to guard and guide you, holding a flickering oil lamp to light your way. The morning air is cold against your skin, and your stomach churns with a mixture of hunger and anticipation of the day's inevitable punishments. You have learned that learning and pain are inseparable companions in the Roman world. Your teacher, the magister, is not the patient, nurturing figure of modern imagination, but a man hardened by his own experiences of Roman discipline. Often a freed slave or a citizen of modest means, he has learned that respect is earned through fear. That knowledge is beaten into young minds like metal shaped upon an anvil. His weathered hands grip the frula with practiced ease, and his eyes scan the rows of students with the calculating gaze of a drill sergeant inspecting recruits. The lesson begins with the recitation of the alphabet, but not the playful, musical chanting of contemporary education. Instead, you and your classmates stand rigid, voices raised in unison, each letter pronounced with military precision. A single mistake, a moment's hesitation. A letter misplaced, any of these infractions will result in the swift descent of the cane across your knuckles, your palms, or your back. The pain is sharp and immediate, but the humiliation burns longer than the physical sting. You learn to read not through stories of wonder and adventure, but through the careful copying of moral maxims and legal texts. Your stylus, made of bronze or bone, scratches across the wax tablet with methodical precision. Durum, justi, harsh, but just you write again and again until the words are burned into your memory. The irony is not lost on you. Even as a child, that you are learning about justice while suffering under a system that offers you no protection from the arbitrary cruelty of your educators. Mathematics comes through the memorization of tables, each number beaten into your consciousness through repetition and the ever-present threat of punishment. You count on your fingers, calculate on your abacus, and recite multiplication tables with the same mechanical precision that Roman soldiers march in formation. Error is not seen as a natural part of learning, but as a moral failing that must be corrected through pain. The writing exercises that fill your afternoons are not creative expressions of a young mind, but careful copies of approved texts. You practice forming letters with the same precision demanded of military engineers drawing architectural plans. Your hand cramps from the repetitive motion. Your eyes strain in the dim light. But you dare not complain. The Magister's Frula rests always within reach, a constant reminder of the price of imperfection. Physical education, when it occurs, is not the playful games of modern childhood, but preparation for the harsh realities of Roman life. Boys learn to march, to hold formations, to endure discomfort without complaint. Girls practice the graceful movements expected of Roman matrons, learning to walk with the dignity befitting their future station. Both sexes learn that their bodies are tools to be disciplined, controlled, and shaped according to social expectations, rather than personal desires. The other children in your class are not allies in this educational ordeal, but competitors whose success might diminish your own standing. You learn to watch for signs of weakness in your classmates, opportunities to gain advantage through their failures. The boy who stumbles over his recitation, the girl who forms her letters imperfectly, their punishments serve as warning sound, shamefully, as small sources of relief that the Magister's attention has fallen elsewhere. Religious instruction permeates every aspect of your education, but it is not the gentle, comforting spirituality of modern religious education. Instead, you learn the complex rituals and obligations that bind Roman citizens to their gods. Every gesture must be perfect, every word pronounced with exact precision. The gods, you are taught, are not loving parental figures but powerful beings, whose favor must be earned through flawless performance. A misplaced word in a prayer, an incorrect gesture in a ritual, these errors anger the gods and bring misfortune upon the entire community. Your teachers speak of the great heroes of Roman history, Cincinnatus, who left his plough to defend the Republic; Horatius, who held the bridge against impossible odds; Mucius Scaevola, who thrust his hand into the fire to demonstrate Roman courage. But these stories are not told to inspire wonder or imagination. They are presented as standards, against which your own character will be measured. Examples of the selfless devotion and physical courage that every Roman child must aspire to embody. The school day extends from dawn until well into the afternoon, with breaks only for the most basic meals. You eat your simple lunch of bread and oil standing up, speaking only when necessary, always aware that the afternoon's lessons will bring new opportunities for error and punishment. The food is nourishment, nothing more. There is no consideration for taste or pleasure, no acknowledgement that children might have different appetites or preferences than adults. When the inevitable mistakes are crowned, they always occur, for perfection is impossible for a young mind still learning to navigate the world. The punishment is swift and public. You are called to the front of the class, your error announced to your classmates, your hands or back offered to the Magister's cane. The pain is immediate and intense, but the psychological impact is more lasting. You learn that failure is not an opportunity for growth, but a source of shame that reflects poorly on your character, your family, and your future prospects as a Roman citizen. The older students, those who have survived several years of this educational system, move through the lessons with a mechanical efficiency that you will eventually develop. They have learned to suppress their natural curiosity, to ask no questions that might be interpreted as challenges to authority, to demonstrate their knowledge through perfect recitation rather than creative thinking. They are becoming what the system demands: disciplined, obedient, and skilled in the arts of warfare and governance that keep the empire strong. Your pedagogus. The slave who escorts you to and from school offers no comfort or sympathy for your daily ordeals. He has learned that his duty is to ensure your physical safety and moral development, not to provide emotional support or encouragement. He walks behind you on the way home, observing your deportment, noting any signs of weakness or improper behavior that he will report to your father. Even this enslaved guardian represents another layer of supervision and potential punishment in your young life. The walk home through the bustling streets of Rome provides no respite from the days. Lessons. You pass by the shops and workshops where craftsmen labor over their trades, and you observe them with the analytical eye that your education has trained you to use. The blacksmith's hammer falls with the same relentless rhythm as your teacher's. Frulla, the baker's apprentice, learns his trade through repetition and correction. The whole city seems to operate on the same principle that governs your education, that skill comes through suffering. That perfection is achieved through the systematic elimination of error. Evening brings no immediate relief, for your education continues within the walls of your home. Your father, the ultimate authority in your life, reviews your progress with the same stern attention he applies to his business affairs. You recite the day's lessons, demonstrate your writing, and submit to questioning about your conduct and performance. Any sign of laziness, any hint of complaint about your treatment, any suggestion that you lack the fortitude expected of a Roman child is. Shortcomings are met with additional punishment, delivered with the same cold efficiency that characterizes all aspects of Roman discipline. The other children in your neighborhood who have completed their school day gather not for games or play, but for additional lessons in the expectations of Roman society. You practice formal greetings, learn the proper way to address adults of different social ranks, and rehearse the behaviors that will be expected of you as you grow into your adult role. Even your free time is structured around the demands of social conformity and the cultivation of useful skills. As the day finally ends and you prepare for sleep, you do not think of the next day with anticipation or excitement. Instead, you steel yourself for another day of tests, another opportunity to prove your worthiness or to suffer the consequences of falling short. You have learned that childhood is not a time of protection and nurturing, but a period of preparation for the harsh realities of adult life. The pain you experience today is justified by the strength it will supposedly build for tomorrow. This is the educational reality of Roman childhood, a system that sees young minds as raw material, to be shaped through systematic pressure and correction. Tomorrow will bring new lessons, new opportunities for error, and new demonstrations of the principle that underlies all Roman education, that true learning comes not through encouragement and support, but through the methodical application of discipline and the constant threat of punishment. The bronze bells of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus ring out across the city as dawn breaks over Rome, their sound echoing through the narrow streets and into the modest homes where Roman children begin another day of sacred obligations. But for you, as a Roman child, these bells do not herald a day of wonder and exploration. They announce the beginning of another series of religious duties that must be performed with the same precision and solemnity expected of the most experienced. Priests, picture yourself rising in the pre-dawn darkness, your small hands already reaching for the simple clay oil lamp that will guide you through the morning rituals. The house is silent except for the soft shuffling of feet and the whispered prayers of the household slaves who have risen even earlier to prepare the day's offerings. You dress quickly in your tunic, the fabric rough against your skin, and make your way to the Lurarium, the small household shrine where the protective spirits of your family reside. The lararium stands in the atrium of your home, a modest wooden cabinet painted with images of the lares and penates, the household gods, who watch over your family's daily life. These are not the gentle, forgiving deities of later religious traditions, but demanding spirits who require constant attention and perfect adherence to ancient rituals as a child. You have learned that these gods are not impressed by your youth, or inexperience. They expect the same flawless performance from you that they demand from adults. Your father, the paterfamilias, stands before the shrine with the bearing of a military commander preparing for battle. His toga is ranged with careful precision, his expression grave and focused. You watch as he pours a libation of wine into a small bronze bowl, the liquid catching the flickering light of the oil lamps. The words he speaks are in the ancient Latin of religious ritual, phrases that have been passed down through generations of Roman families, each syllable pronounced with the exact emphasis that tradition demands. Now it is your turn to participate in this daily ceremony. You step forward, your small hands trembling slightly as you take the pinch of incense that your father offers. The frankincense is precious, imported from distant lands at considerable expense, and you know that wasting even a single grain would be both sacrilege and a betrayal of your family's resources. You approach the small bronze brazier where the sacred fire burns, the heat warming your face as you carefully place the incense on the glowing coals. The smoke rises in thin, grey tendrils, carrying your family's prayers to the gods above. But you have learned that prayer is not a conversation with benevolent beings who love you unconditionally. Instead, it is a formal contract, a precise recitation of requests and promises that must be delivered with perfect accuracy. A mispronounced word, a forgotten phrase, an incorrect gesture, any of these errors might anger the gods and bring misfortune upon your entire household. You recite the morning prayer alongside your father, your young voice joining with his in. The ancient words, les familiares, vos rogo precorcuti citus volentes propiti mihi domui familiac me. The Latin flows from your lips with practiced ease, though the concepts behind the words are as foreign to your childhood understanding as the customs of distant barbarian tribes. You are asking the household gods to be willing and favorable to you, your home, and your family. But you do not truly comprehend what this means or why it matters. The ritual continues with offerings of food, bread, salt, wine, and honey, each item placed on the shrine with ceremonial precision. You watch as your father breaks the bread into specific portions, as he measures the salt with careful attention to traditional proportions. These are not random acts of devotion, but prescribed ceremonies that must be performed exactly as your ancestors performed them centuries ago. Innovation is not welcome in Roman religion. The gods prefer the familiar rhythms of ancient custom. As the morning prayers conclude, you do not feel the warm satisfaction that might come from modern religious practice. Instead, you experience a sense of nervous relief that you have successfully completed another required duty without error. The gods have been appeased for another day. The protective spirits of your household have received their due honor, and you have demonstrated your competence in the most basic responsibility of a Roman citizen. But the religious obligations of your day have only just begun. As you make your way through the streets of Rome toward your school, you pass countless shrines and temples, each one demanding acknowledgement and respect. The small shrine to the Lares Compitoles at the intersection of two streets requires a brief genuflection and a whispered prayer. The Temple of Vesta, where the sacred fire burns eternally, demands that you remove your head covering and bow in recognition of the goddess's power. The statue of Mercury in the marketplace must be touched for luck and offered a small coin if your family's finances permit. These are not optional gestures of personal piety, but social obligations that mark you as a properly raised Roman child. The other citizens observe your behavior, noting whether you show appropriate reverence for the gods. whether you demonstrate the religious discipline that is expected of your generation. Failure to observe these customs would not only anger the gods, but also bring shame upon your family and mark you as someone who cannot be trusted with the responsibilities of adult citizenship. At school, your religious education continues under the stern guidance of your magister. You learn to recite the names of the major gods and goddesses, to understand their spheres of influence, and to memorize the proper forms of address for different deities. Mars, the god of war, must be approached with the bearing of a soldier. Venus, the goddess of love, requires the graceful demeanor of a courtesan. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, demands the respectful attention of a student. Each deity has specific requirements, particular preferences, and unique ways of demonstrating displeasure with inadequate worship. The stories of the gods that you learn are not the sanitized myths of modern retellings, but harsh tales of divine vengeance and arbitrary punishment. You hear of mortals who are transformed into animals from minor slights, of cities destroyed, because their citizens failed to show proper respect to visiting deities, of families cursed for generations because of a single religious error. These stories are not entertainment, but warnings, reminders that the gods are dangerous beings who must be approached with extreme caution and perfect preparation. Your teacher emphasizes that the gods are not interested in your personal feelings or individual desires. They care only about proper performance of ritual duties, exact adherence to traditional forms, and the maintenance of the divine order that keeps the Roman state strong and prosperous. Your childhood prayers are not intimate conversations with loving protectors, but formal reports to demanding supervisors who expect competent performance from even the youngest citizens. The afternoon brings additional religious obligations as you participate in the public festivals that mark the Roman calendar. These are not joyful celebrations, but solemn ceremonies that require your active participation and flawless behavior. During the Lupercalia, you watch as priests run through the streets, striking women with strips of goat hide to ensure fertility. During the Saturnalia, you participate in the temporary reversal of social roles, but even this apparent freedom is governed by strict rules and traditional limitations. Your participation in these festivals is not optional, nor is it designed for your enjoyment. Instead, it serves to educate you in the religious traditions that bind Roman society together and to demonstrate your family's commitment to the ancient customs that have made Rome great. You learn to stand vows in uncomfortable positions, to maintain solemn expressions even when your young mind wants to wander, to suppress your natural curiosity about the elaborate rituals unfolding round you. The priests who conduct these ceremonies are not warm, approachable figures who might answer your questions or explain the meaning behind the rituals. They are remote, authoritative men who have dedicated their lives to the precise performance of religious duties. They wear elaborate robes, carry sacred implements, and speak in the archaic language of religious ceremony. To them, you are not a child to be nurtured, but a future citizen who must learn to fulfill his or her religious obligations without question or hesitation. As evening approaches and you return home, the religious duties of your day continue. The evening prayers at the household shrine must be performed with the same precision as the morning rituals. The gods who protected your family during the day must be thanked. The spirits who watched over your journey must be acknowledged, and the protective deities who guard your home must be honored before you can rest. Your father leads these evening prayers with the same stern attention to detail that he brings to all religious observance. Yes, you stand beside him, your small hands folded in the prescribed manner, your voice joining with his in the ancient words of thanksgiving. The oil lamps flicker in the slight breeze that moves through the atrium, casting dancing shadows on the painted walls and the small bronze figures of the household gods. The prayers conclude with offerings of food and drink, the remnants of your evening meal transformed into sacred gifts for the gods. You watch as your father pours wine into the libation bowl, as he places bread and honey on the shrine, as he lights the incense that will carry your family's gratitude to the divine realm. These are not acts of spontaneous devotion, but carefully orchestrated ceremonies that must be performed exactly as tradition demands before you retire to your simple sleeping quarters. You perform one final religious duty, the recitation of protective prayers that will guard you through the night. These are not comforting bedtime prayers, but formal requests for divine protection against the dangers that lurk in the darkness. Evil spirits, malevolent ghosts, and hostile gods all pose threats to sleeping mortals, and only proper prayers and protective rituals can ensure your safety until dawn. As you lie on your simple pallet, surrounded by the darkness of the Roman night, you do not think of the gods with the warm affection that modern children might feel toward protective divine figures. Instead, you experience a complex mixture of fear and respect, understanding that these powerful beings are watching your every action, judging your every word, and keeping careful account of your successes and failures in the performance of religious duties. The sounds of the night, the distant call of the watchmen, the creaking of wooden shutters, the soft footsteps of household slaves attending to their duties remind you that even in sleep, you are not free from the watchful eyes of the gods. They observe your dreams, they note your unconscious movements, and they will judge your worthiness when you awaken to face another day of religious obligations. This is the sacred burden of Roman childhood, the knowledge that your relationship with the divine realm is not based on love or personal connection, but on the precise performance of inherited duties. Tomorrow will bring new rituals, new opportunities to demonstrate your religious competence, and new reminders that the gods are not interested in your happiness, but only in your absolute obedience to the ancient traditions that have made Rome the master of the known world. Your childhood devotion is not a source of comfort, but a preparation for the lifelong burden of maintaining the divine favor that keeps the empire strong and your family safe from the countless dangers that threaten those who fail to honor the gods with proper reverence and perfect ritual performance. Let us now journey back through time to witness the childhood of perhaps Rome's most famous son, Gaius Julius Caesar, born into the world of Roman aristocracy around 100 BCE. But do not imagine the coddled existence of a modern child born to wealth and privilege. Instead, picture a boy whose every breath, every word, every gesture was measured against the towering expectations of a family that traced its lineage back to the goddess Venus herself, a child whose destiny was written not in the stars but in the harsh realities of Roman political ambition. The domus of the Julii stands on the Subura, not yet the fashionable district it would later become, but a bustling neighborhood where the sounds of commerce and conversation fill the air from dawn till well past sunset, here, in a house that speaks of ancient nobility rather than recent wealth. Young Gaius begins each day not with the gentle awakening of childhood, but with the systematic preparation for a life of public service that will demand every ounce of his strength, intelligence, and ruthless ambition. Picture yourself as this 6-year-old boy standing in the cool morning air of the family atrium, your small frame dwarfed by the imposing wax masks of your ancestors that line the walls there. Imagined Maiorum, that serve as silent witnesses to the greatness you're expected to achieve. These death masks stare down at you with hollow eyes, their expressions frozen in the stern dignity that marked their lives and deaths in service to Rome. Each face represents a consul, a general, a hero whose deeds are recited to you daily as examples of the standard you must one day meet or exceed. Your father, Gaius Julius Caesar the Elder, approaches your morning education with the systematic precision of a military campaign. There is no warmth in his greeting, no gentle inquiry about your rest or your dreams. Instead, he begins immediately with the day's lessons. his voice carrying the authority of a man who has served Rome in the praetorship and who expects his son to surpass even his own considerable lackey. Evidence. The love he bears you is expressed not through tender words or physical affection, but through the relentless preparation he provides for your future greatness. The morning begins with physical training that would challenge grown men. You run through the streets of Rome, your small legs pumping to keep pace with your pedagogus, a Greek slave whose own education in rhetoric and philosophy was considered the finest that money could buy. But this running is not play, it is preparation for the campaigns you will one day lead, training for the physical endurance that Roman commanders must possess to survive the rigors of military life. Your lungs burn with the effort, your legs ache from the exertion, but you have learned that complaints are signs of weakness unworthy of a future Caesar. The training continues with wrestling and boxing, supervised by experienced gladiators who have been hired specifically to teach you the arts of combat. These men, scarred veterans of the arena, show you no mercy because of your age or noble birth. They throw you to the sand repeatedly, teaching you to fall correctly, to rise quickly, to endure pain without crying out. Each bruise is a lesson in resilience, each defeat an opportunity to learn the techniques that might one day save your life on a battlefield far from Rome. Swimming in the Tiber is another essential element of your physical education, though the river that flows through Rome bears little resemblance to the carefully maintained pools of modern recreation. The water is cold and often foul, filled with the detritus of urban life and the occasional corpse of those who have met unfortunate ends. You learn to navigate these treacherous waters with the same determination that you bring to war. Your studies, understanding that a Roman commander must be prepared to cross any river, ford any stream, and survive in any environment that the empire's expansion might demand. Your intellectual education begins before dawn with the study of Greek. For no Roman gentleman can claim to be truly educated without mastery of the language that gave birth to philosophy, poetry, and the arts of persuasion. Your Greek tutor, Apollodorus, is a stern Athenian who has been purchased specifically for his expertise in rhetoric and literature. He speaks to you only in Greek, forcing you to think in the language of Homer and Demosthenes, to absorb not just the words but the cultural sophistication that marks a truly civilized Roman. Under Apollodorus's guidance, you memorize vast passages from the Iliad and the Odyssey, not for the adventure and excitement that might appeal to a young mind, but for the lessons in leadership, strategy, and the complex relationships between mortals and gods that will inform your future political career. Achilles becomes not a hero of romance, but a study in the proper use of righteous anger. Odysseus transforms from an adventurer into a masterclass in political cunning and adaptability. Every story carries multiple layers of meaning that you must decode and understand. The study of rhetoric occupies the central position in your education, for in the Roman world, the ability to persuade through speech is as essential as skill with sword and shield. You learn the 5 parts of classical oratory inventio, dispositio, elocutio, memoria, and pronunciatio through endless practice and repetition. Your young voice practices the dramatic gestures and vocal modulations that will one day hold the Senate spellbound, that will rally armies to follow you into impossible battles, that will convince the people of Rome to grant you unprecedented powers. Your rhetorical exercises begin with simple protonasmata preliminary exercises that teach you to construct arguments, to defend paradoxical positions, to find persuasive elements in any situation. You practice speaking both sides of historical controversies, learning to argue with equal conviction for Brutus and Caesar, for Pompey and Crassus, for the Republic and monarchy. This is not intellectual play, but essential training in the mental flexibility that Roman politics demands. The morning's studies include detailed analysis of Roman law, though at your age the complex legal reasoning often exceeds your comprehension. Nevertheless, you memorize vast sections of the 12 tables, the foundational laws of Rome, and begin to understand the intricate relationship between legal precedent and political power. Your father explains that law is not an abstract system of justice, but a tool of governance, a means by which intelligent men shape society according to their will and vision. History forms another crucial element of your education. But it is not the neutral recounting of past events that modern students might expect. Instead, you learn the carefully curated version of Roman greatness that serves to inspire and instruct future leaders, the stories of Romulus and Remus, of Cincinnatus and Camillus, of Scipio and Marius are presented not as entertainment but as case studies in leadership, examples of how great men respond to crisis and opportunity. Your father takes particular care to ensure that you understand the political context of every historical event. The way that individual decisions by Roman leaders created or destroyed opportunities for advancement. You learn to see history not as a series of inevitable events, but as the result of human choices. Understanding that your own decisions will one day become part of the historical record that future generations will study and judge. The afternoon brings instruction in the practical arts of administration and command. You learn to read and compose the kinds of dispatches that governors send to Rome, to understand the complex logistics that keep armies fed and equipped in distant provinces. Your tutors explain the intricacies of taxation, the management of public works, and the delicate relationships between Roman officials and local populations throughout the expanding empire. Military science occupies an increasingly important place in your curriculum as you grow older and stronger. You study the campaigns of great generals, learning to read terrain maps, to understand the principles of fortification and siege warfare, to appreciate the complex coordination required to move large armies across hostile territory. Your tutors use sand tables and wooden models to demonstrate famous battles, teaching you to think strategically about the deployment of troops and the timing of attacks. But perhaps the most important element of your education is the training in what Romans call gravitas, the serious dignity that marks a man worthy of command. You learn to control your facial expressions, to modulate your voice for maximum effect, to carry yourself with the confidence that inspires others to follow. This is not natural behavior for a child, but rather a carefully constructed persona that you must perfect through constant practice and self-awareness. Your social education occurs during the carefully orchestrated dinner parties that your father hosts for his political allies and potential supporters. You are not a participant in these gatherings, but rather an observer, learning to recognize the subtle signals by which powerful men communicate their intentions and allegiances. You watch how your father manages conversations, how he guides discussions toward favorable conclusions, how he uses hospitality as a tool of political influence. The guests at these dinners represent the cream of Roman society, senators and generals, wealthy merchants and influential priests. You learn to recognize them by sight, to understand their family connections and political positions, to appreciate the complex web of obligations and favors that binds the Roman elite together. This knowledge will prove invaluable when you begin your own political career and must navigate the treacherous currents of Roman public life. Your father's expectations for your future are communicated not through encouraging words, but through the relentless intensity of your daily preparation, every lesson, every exercise. Every moment of your childhood is designed to prepare you for the consulship and the military commands that represent the pinnacle of Roman achievement. You understand, even as a child, that your life belongs not to you but to Rome, and that your personal desires and preferences are irrelevant compared to the greatness that destiny demands of you. The pressure of these expectations manifests itself in ways that would concern modern parents, but which Roman fathers consider essential elements of character formation, You learn to suppress steers, to hide fear, to present a confident facade even when uncertainty gnaws at your young mind. The emotional resilience that will one day allow you to cross the Rubicon and defy the Senate is being forged in these childhood moments of forced self-control and premature maturity. As evening approaches and the day's formal lessons conclude, you do not retire to play or relaxation. Instead, you spend your final waking hours in private study, reviewing the day's lessons, memorizing passages from great orators, and practicing the skills that will define your adult life. The oil lamp burns late into the night as you perfect your Greek pronunciation, rehearse rhetorical arguments, and contemplate the examples of greatness that surround you in the form of ancestral death masks. And family legends dot the young Caesar, who emerges from this intensive education will possess the skills, knowledge, and iron determination that will one day reshape the Roman world. But the cost of this preparation is the loss of childhood itself, the sacrifice of innocent wonder and carefree play on the altar of Roman ambition. You are being forged like a blade in a furnace, heated and hammered and tempered until you become the weapon that Rome requires for its continued dominance over the known world. As young Gaius Julius Caesar enters his 10th year, the gentle facade of childhood education gives way to increasingly harsh tests designed to forge the steel of his character through fire and adversity. The boy who will one day cross the Rubicon and declare himself dictator must first survive the crucible of Roman adolescence, where every weakness is exposed, every vulnerability exploited, and every moment of softness burned away by the relentless demands of aristocratic expectation. Picture yourself standing in the campus marshes on a bitter winter morning, the ground hard with frost beneath your bare feet, your breath forming clouds in the frigid air as you prepare for another day of military training. The instructors who surround you are not the patient teachers of modern education, but battle-scarred veterans who have served the brutal campaigns that maintain Rome's expanding frontiers. They look upon your young aristocratic face with a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed contempt, knowing that noble birth means nothing on the battlefield where they learned their deadly skills. Each training begins before dawn with exercises designed to test not just your physical strength, but your ability to endure discomfort without complaint. You run in formation with boys from other noble families, your feet bleeding from the rough stones, your lungs burning in the cold air, but you dare not slow your pace or show signs of weakness. The instructors watch for any sign of faltering, any indication that you lack the iron constitution that Roman commanders require. Those who stumble are beaten, those who cry out are humiliated, and those who cannot keep pace are dismissed as unworthy of further training. Sword work follows. The running, though the gladius you wield is sized for adult hands and weighted to build strength in your growing muscles. Your opponent is another boy of similar age and background, but there is no camaraderie in this combat training. You are taught to strike with intent to injure, to see your training partner not as a friend, but as an enemy whose defeat will demonstrate your own superiority. The wooden swords leave bruises that cover your arms and torso, marks that you wear with pride as evidence of your dedication to the warrior's craft. The psychological pressure of these training sessions extends far beyond physical discomfort. Your instructors deliberately humiliate and degrade you, stripping away the natural confidence of childhood and replacing it with the hard-earned competence that comes from overcoming adversity. They call you soft, weak, unworthy of your father's name, using shame and anger as tools to push you beyond what you believed were your limitations. This is not cruelty, but necessary preparation for the harsh realities of command, where self-doubt can mean death for yourself and disaster for the men who follow you. Your father observes these training sessions with the cold analytical gaze of a general reviewing troops before battle. He takes no pride in your successes and shows no sympathy for your failures. Understanding that praise would only weaken your character and sympathy would ill prepare you for the indifferent hostility of the world beyond Rome's walls. When you limp home at the end of each day, bruised and exhausted, he examines your injuries with clinical interest, noting which techniques you have failed to master, which defensive movements you must practice until they become instinctive. The evenings bring no respite from this intensive preparation, for your intellectual education continues with the same relentless intensity as your physical training. Your rhetoric instructor, Marcus Antonius Nefo, subjects your adolescent attempts at oratory to withering criticism designed to destroy any trace of adolescent pride or self-satisfaction. Every speech you deliver is dissected with surgical precision, every argument examined for logical flaws, every gesture analyzed for effectiveness and authenticity. Under Nefo's harsh tutelage, you learn that rhetoric is not merely the art of beautiful speaking, but a weapon as deadly as any sword, a tool for shaping men's minds and bending their wills to your purpose. You practice delivering eulogies for enemies you have never met, defending actions you find morally repugnant, and arguing positions that contradict your deepest beliefs. This exercise in intellectual flexibility teaches you that truth is subordinate to effectiveness, that conviction matters less than persuasion, and that a skillful orator can make the weaker argument appear stronger through the force of his presentation. Your studies in Greek philosophy under the guidance of Apollodorus intensify as you develop the intellectual capacity to grapple with complex moral and political questions. But this is not the gentle exploration of ideas that modern students might expect. Instead, you are forced to defend philosophical positions in formal debates where losing means not just intellectual defeat, but public humiliation before your peers and instructors. You learn to think quickly under pressure, to find logical weaknesses in your opponent's arguments, and to present your own ideas with the clarity and force that will one day sway the Roman Senate. The pressure to excel in these intellectual competitions creates a constant state of anxiety that permeates every aspect of your daily life. You study late into the night by lamplight, memorizing vast passages from Cicero and Demosthenes, practicing vocal exercises that will give your speeches maximum emotional impact. Sleep becomes a luxury you can rarely afford, and your dreams, when they come, are filled with the faces of stern instructors and the echoes of failed recitations that might damage your reputation and your family's honor. Your social education during this period becomes increasingly complex as you begin to understand the intricate web of alliances and enmities that define Roman political life. Your father introduces you to his political associates not as a beloved son, but as a future player in the great game of power. A young man whose allegiances and capabilities must be assessed and cultivated. These men examine you with calculating eyes, measuring your potential usefulness as an ally or your danger as a rival. The dinner conversations you overhear become tutorials in political strategy as sophisticated as any formal education. You learn to recognize the subtle signals by which senators communicate their positions on controversial issues, the coded language they use to discuss matters that cannot be spoken of openly, and the complex calculus of favor and obligation that governs every significant decision in Roman public life. This knowledge comes with the understanding that you are expected to join this dangerous game, to risk everything in pursuit of the offices and honors that define a successful Roman career. Your first public appearance as a member of your family's political faction occurs during a contentious debate in the Forum Romanum, where your father's supporters gather to hear speeches advocating for legislation that will benefit their interests. You stand among the crowd of toga-clad citizens, learning to read the mood of the assembly, to recognize the techniques that skilled orators use to manipulate popular opinion. The experience is both thrilling and terrifying, as you realize that your own future will depend on your ability to master these same skills and to command the attention and loyalty of similar crowds. Irreligious aspects of your education take on new complexity as you approach the age when you will assume adult responsibilities in the sacred ceremonies that maintain Rome's relationship with the gods. You begin training for the priesthood of Jupiter, learning the intricate rituals and taboos that govern the Flamen Dialis. The high priest whose life is governed by hundreds of restrictions designed to maintain his sacred purity. This training requires you to memorize countless ceremonial procedures, to practice ritual gestures until they become perfect, and to understand the theological principles that underlie Rome's complex religious system. But this religious education is not a source of spiritual comfort or personal growth. Instead, it represents another arena of competition and another opportunity for a failure that could damage your family's standing in Roman society. The priests who train you are as demanding as your military instructors, as critical as your rhetoric teachers, and as unsympathetic to weakness as every other adult who shapes your adolescent character. They expect perfection in every ceremony, flawless execution of every ritual, and absolute commitment to the sacred duties that will consume much of your adult life. Your relationship with your contemporaries becomes increasingly strained as the competitive pressures of aristocratic education pit you against boys who should be your friends and allies. Every academic exercise becomes a contest for prestige. Every athletic competition a struggle for dominance. Every social interaction an opportunity to gain advantage or suffer humiliation. You learn to trust no one completely, to reveal no weakness that might be exploited, and to view every peer as a potential threat to your own advancement. The isolation that results from this constant competition is perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of your education. While modern children form friendships based on shared interests and natural affinity, you must calculate the political value of every relationship, the potential benefits and risks of every alliance. The genuine human connections that might provide emotional support and personal happiness are sacrificed to the demands of strategic thinking and tactical advantage. Your father watches your development during this crucial period with the detached interest of a breeder observing a promising colt, noting signs of strength and weakness, adjusting your training to address deficiencies and enhance natural talents. He shows you no more affection than he would a prize racehorse, understanding that emotional attachment would cloud his judgment and interfere with the systematic development of your character. The love he bears you is expressed through the quality of your education and the relentless preparation he provides for your future challenges. Physical changes accompany the psychological transformation as your body begins the transition from childhood to manhood, but there is no gentle guidance through this natural process, no understanding support for the confusion and uncertainty that normally accompany adolescence. Instead, your instructors use your physical development as another opportunity for testing and challenge, increasing the demands of your training to match your growing strength and endurance. The sword work becomes more intense as your muscles develop the power to wield adult weapons effectively. You learn to fight with the gladius and scutum, the sword and shield combination that has made Roman legions invincible across the known world. But this is not the choreographed combat of theatrical performance. Instead, you engage in brutal contests where real injuries are common and mercy is seen as weakness that must be beaten out of potent. Il commanders, your rhetoric training evolves to match your maturing voice and developing intellectual capacity. You begin participating in formal debates on subjects of genuine political importance, arguing before audiences that include your father's political associates and other influential Romans who will remember your performances when you begin your own career. The pressure to excel in these exercises is enormous, as failure could damage not only your own reputation, but your family's political standing. The transition from childhood to adolescence brings with it the gradual understanding that your life is not your own, that every choice you make must serve the interests of your family and the Roman state. The dreams and fantasies that might occupy a modern teenager's mind are replaced by cold calculation of political advantage and strategic positioning. You learn to think not in terms of personal happiness or individual fulfillment, but in terms of duty, honor, and the relentless pursuit of greatness that Roman society demands from its future leaders. As you approach your 15th birthday and the ceremony that will mark your transition to adult citizenship, you have been transformed from the innocent child who once played in your family's atrium into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The boy who dreamed of adventure and excitement has been replaced by a calculating young man who understands that power is the only currency that matters in the Roman world, and that every relationship, every gesture, every word must serve the ultimate goal of achieving dominance over other men. This transformation is not unique to your experience as a future Caesar. Throughout Rome, in the houses of the aristocracy, similar processes are creating the next generation of senators, generals, and governors who will maintain the empire's dominance through intelligence, ruthlessness, and the complete subordination of personal desires to public ambition. The children who emerge from this system will be capable of extraordinary achievements, but they will have paid for their competence with the loss of everything that makes childhood precious and a rebel. Isabel. The 15th year of young Gaius Julius Caesar's life rives like the turning of a great wheel, bringing with it ceremonies and challenges that will complete his transformation from protected child to Roman citizen capable of bearing the full weight of imperial responsibility. But this passage to manhood is not the gentle celebration of natural development that modern families might recognize. Instead, it represents the final and most demanding phase of an educational process designed to strip away every vestige of childhood softness and replace it with the iron discipline that Roman leadership demands. Picture yourself standing before the bronze mirror in your family's atrium on the morning that will mark the end of your childhood forever. The boy who gazes back at you from the polished surface bears little resemblance to the innocent child who once played among these same columns. Your body has been hardened by years of brutal physical training, your mind sharpened by relentless intellectual competition, and your spirit tempered by the systematic application of pressure and adversity. The soft curves of childhood have been replaced by the angular planes of developing manhood, and your eyes hold the calculating wariness of someone who has learned that survival depends on constant vigilance and careful planning. The ceremony of the toga virilis, the assumption of the pure white toga that marks your transition to adult citizenship, takes place not in the privacy of your home, but in the public forum where all Rome can witness your family's latest contribution to the ruling class. Your father stands beside you with the same grave dignity that he has maintained throughout your education. But now there is a subtle shift in his demeanor, a recognition that you are no longer his property to be shaped and molded, but a potential rival who must be watched and managed with increasing care. The toga itself, that elaborate garment that will become the symbol of your citizenship and your burden, requires months of practice to wear with proper dignity. The complex draping, the careful arrangement of folds, the precise positioning that allows for graceful movement while maintaining the garment's formal appearance, all of these skills must be mastered before you can appear in public without embarrassing yourself and your family. The weight of the wool, heavy with the significance of Roman tradition, settles on your shoulders like a physical manifestation of the responsibilities you are now expected to bear. Your first public speech as a Roman citizen takes place on the steps of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, where you deliver a carefully prepared oration that has been reviewed and revised by your rhetoric instructors until every word serves the dual purpose of demonstrating your competence and advancing your family's political interests. The audience, that gathers to hear you speak includes not only your relatives and family friends, but also potential political allies and rivals who will judge your performance and file away their impressions. For future reference, the speech itself deals with traditional themes of Roman virtue and imperial destiny. But your delivery must demonstrate the mastery of oratorical technique that years of harsh training have supposedly provided. Every gesture must be calculated. For maximum effect, every pause timed to enhance the emotional impact of your words. Every vocal modulation designed to hold your audience's attention and convince them of your sincerity and competence. The pressure of this performance is enormous, as failure could damage not only your own reputation, but your family's standing in the complex web of Roman politics. Your father's associates in the Senate and the various offices of Roman government now begin to treat you not as a child to be indulged, but as a potential asset or threat to be carefully evaluated. They observe your behavior with the same analytical attention they would apply to a foreign ambassador or a military opponent, noting signs of intelligence or weakness, ambition or complacency, loyalty or potential treachery. These assessments will influence the opportunities offered to you and the obstacles placed in your path as you begin your own climb toward political power. The military training that has occupied so much of your adolescence now takes on deadly seriousness as you prepare for your first actual campaign. No longer will you practice sword work against padded opponents or study siege tactics from the safety of the classroom. Instead, you will accompany seasoned commanders to the frontiers of the Empire, where the theoretical knowledge of your education will be tested against the brutal realities of warfare and the constant threat of violent death. Your assignment to the staff of Marcus Thermus, the praetor governing Asia, provides your first taste of real command responsibility and genuine danger. The journey to your posting takes you far from the familiar streets of Rome, through landscapes that grow increasingly foreign and threatening as you travel toward the eastern borders of Roman control. The comfort and security of your childhood home fade behind you like a half-remembered dream, replaced by the harsh accommodations and constant vigilance that military life demands. The campaign against the city of Mytilene becomes your introduction to the true cost of Roman expansion, and the price that both Romans and their enemies pay for imperial glory. You witness your first siege, your first battle, your first encounter with the screaming chaos of men trying to kill each other with bronze and iron weapons. The theoretical knowledge of military tactics that you memorized in your father's study proves inadequate preparation for the reality of combat, where split-second decisions mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. Life and death. Your performance during this campaign earns you the civic crown, the Corona Civica awarded for saving the life of a fellow citizen in battle. But this honor, the highest military decoration Rome can bestow, comes at a cost that no amount of childhood preparation could have anticipated. The man whose life you saved dies of his wounds 3 days later, despite your heroic intervention. The enemy soldiers you killed in the fighting haunt your dreams with their final expressions of pain and terror. The comrades who died fighting beside you leave gaps in your life that can never be filled by new relationships or future victories. Your return to Rome brings not the celebration and relief you might have expected, but instead the beginning of a new phase of political education that proves even more dangerous than military combat. Your success in Asia has marked you as a young man of promise, someone worth cultivating as an ally or eliminating as a threat. The congratulations you receive from your father's political associates carry undertones of calculation and assessment that remind you constantly that friendship in Roman politics is always conditional and temporary. Your first appearance in the courts as an advocate provides another test of the skills that your education has supposedly provided. The case you are assigned the prosecution of Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella for extortion during his go Governorship of Macedonia involves not just legal arguments, but complex political maneuvering that could enhance or destroy your reputation depending on the outcome. The preparation for this trial requires months of intensive study, interviews with witnesses, and negotiations with other advocates and political figures who have their own interests in the case's result. LUTO and the trial itself unfolds in the forum Romanum before an audience that includes the most powerful and influential Romans of your generation. Your opening statement, delivered with all the rhetorical skill that years of brutal training have provided, must convince the jury not only of Dolabella's guilt, but of your own competence as a legal advocate and potential political leader. The cross-examination of witnesses tests your ability to think quickly under pressure, to adapt your strategy to unexpected developments, and to maintain your composure when faced with hostile questioning and personal attacks. Your defeat in this trial for Dolabella's superior resources and political connections ultimately proved decisive, provides a harsh lesson in the realities of Roman justice and the limitations of talent. When confronted with wealth and influence, the loss damages your reputation and forces you to reconsider your strategies for advancement. But it also teaches you valuable lessons about the nature of power and the importance of building stronger political alliances before attempting such ambitious prosecutions. The aftermath of the trial brings a period of careful rebuilding and strategic planning as you work to repair the damage to your reputation and identify new opportunities for advancement. Your father's guidance during this difficult period proves invaluable, as his experience with political setbacks and recoveries provides a template for your own rehabilitation. You learn that failure is not necessarily fatal in Roman politics, but that recovery requires patience, intelligence, and the ability to wait for the right moment to reassert your ambitions. Your studies in Rhodes under the famous rhetoric teacher Apollonius Milon represent both an exile from Rome and an opportunity to perfect the oratorical skills that will be essential for your future political career. The island's distance from Roman politics provides a safe haven where you can continue your education without the constant pressure and danger of factional conflicts. But it also removes you from the networks and relationships that are essential for political advancement. The capture by pirates during your journey to Rhodes provides an unexpected test of the leadership skills and personal courage that your education has supposedly developed. Your behavior during the captivity demanding that your ransom be increased because the amount initially requested was inadequate for a person of your importance. Promising to return and crucify your captors once you are released demonstrates the supreme confidence and ruthless determination that will characterize your adult career. Your fulfillment of this promise, returning with a fleet to capture and execute the pirates who held you hostage, establishes your reputation as a man whose threats should be taken seriously and whose word, once given, will be kept regardless of the cost. This demonstration of Roman virtues, of the moral courage and physical bravery that define true nobility, marks you as someone worthy of serious political consideration and marks the end of the period when you could be dismissed as merely a promising youth. The return to Rome that follows your various adventures and educational experiences brings you back to a city that has changed during your absence, where new alliances have formed and old ones have dissolved, where your contemporaries have advanced their own careers and your rivals have consolidated their positions. You must now begin the long and dangerous process of building your own political faction, identifying potential allies and neutralizing potential enemies, while avoiding the premature conflicts that could destroy your career before it has truly begun. Your marriage to Cornelia, the daughter of the powerful Lucius Cornelius Cinna, represents your first major independent political decision and your entry into the complex web of alliances and obligations that define Roman public life. This is not a union based on romantic love or personal compatibility, but a strategic alliance designed to advance both families' interests and provide a foundation for your future political career. The bride you take is not a companion chosen for affection, but a political asset whose connections and dowry will help fund your climb toward the consulship. The birth of your daughter Julia completes your transformation from a boy defined by his potential to a man responsible for the continuation of your family line and the advancement of your political interests. The child who bears your name represents both a hostage to fortune and a powerful motivation for future success. A reminder that your actions will determine not only your own fate, but the destiny of the next generation of your family. As you stand in your own atrium, now decorated with the death mask of your father and the other ancestors whose achievements you must surpass. You have completed the long and painful journey from childhood to Roman manhood. The boy who once played among these columns has been transformed into something harder, more dangerous, and infinitely more capable of achieving the greatness that Roman society demands from its leaders. The education that began with your first acceptance into the family has culminated in your readiness to begin the climb toward ultimate power, armed with the skills, knowledge, and ruthless determination that will one day make you master of the Roman world. But the cost of this transformation remains hidden even from yourself, the price paid in lost innocence, suppressed emotion, and the systematic destruction of every quality that might have made you a gentler, more compassionate human being. The Caesar who will cross the Rubicon and reshape the ancient world has been forged through a process that would horrify modern parents. A systematic elimination of weakness that has also eliminated much of what we would recognize as humanity. You have become the perfect product of Roman education, a weapon of flesh and blood designed for conquest and command. But the child who might have laughed with genuine joy or loved without calculation has been sacrificed on the altar of imperial ambition. Now let us turn our attention from the grand narratives of imperial education to the humble objects that archaeology has recovered from the buried cities and forgotten graveyards of the Roman world. These silent witnesses speak with a voice more haunting than any historical account, revealing truths about Roman childhood that the literary sources, written by and for adults, often omit or sanitize. In the broken toys and tiny tombstones, in the miniature armor and child-sized shackles, we find evidence of a world where childhood was both precious and expendable, where love and cruelty existed in combinations that would bewilder modern sensibilities. Picture yourself walking through the ruins of Pompeii in the quiet hours before dawn, when the tourist crowds have not yet arrived and the ancient streets lie empty beneath the shadow of Vesuvius. The volcanic ash that destroyed the city in 79 CE has preserved not only the grand public buildings and elaborate private villas, but also the intimate domestic spaces where Roman children lived their daily lives. Here, frozen in time by catastrophe, we can examine the material culture of childhood with a precision that no other ancient site allows. In the Costa del Trogo, the house of the surgeon, archaeologists have uncovered a child's bedroom that tells a story both touching and disturbing in its implications. The small bed, constructed of wood and bronze with mattress supports made of interwoven leather strips, would have accommodated a child of perhaps 8 or 10 years old. But beside this bed, carefully arranged on a wooden shelf, stands a collection of miniature surgical instruments, tiny scalpels, forceps, and probes that mirror the professional tools found elsewhere in the house. These are not toys in any sense that modern children would recognize, but rather training implements designed to prepare a young mind for the serious business of medical practice. The child who slept in this room was expected to begin learning surgical techniques before reaching adolescence, to develop the steady hands and clinical detachment that Roman medicine demanded. The bronze instruments show signs of actual use, their edges worn smooth by practice on cadavers or perhaps living patients whose suffering was considered an acceptable price for the child's education. The wall paintings in this same room depict scenes from Homer's Iliad, but they focus specifically on moments of violence and suffering Achilles dragging Hector's body around the walls of Troy, the death of Patroclus, the sack of Troy with its accompanying slaughter and enslavement. These images served not as entertainment, but as moral instruction, teaching the young occupant that glory comes through the infliction and endurance of pain, that honor is earned through violence, and that the gods favor those who can maintain their composure in the face of cruelty. Moving through the narrow streets of the Suburra, the working-class district of Pompeii, we encounter a different but equally disturbing set of archaeological evidence. In a modest bakery, excavators have discovered the remains of a child's workstation, a grinding wheel sized for small hands, an eating trough built at child height, and a series of bronze measuring cups designed for fingers not yet fully grown. The wear patterns on these implements indicate years of daily use, suggesting that children as young as 6 or 7 were expected to contribute significant labor to their family's economic survival. The skeletal remains found in this bakery tell an even more sobering story. The bones of children show evidence of repetitive stress injuries typically associated with heavy manual labor, compressed vertebrae from carrying grain sacks, enlarged muscle attachment points from operating the grinding wheel, and deformed finger bones from the constant manipulation of dough and tools. These children were not playing at adult work, but performing the same demanding tasks as their adult counterparts, their growing bodies bearing the permanent marks of premature industriousness. In the villa of a wealthy merchant family, the children's quarters reveal a different but equally troubling aspect of Roman childhood. Here we find elaborately decorated rooms filled with expensive toys and educational materials, but also evidence of a surveillance and control system that would shock modern parents. Hidden panels in the walls concealed observation points where slaves could monitor the children's behavior, recording their conversations and reporting any signs of weakness, rebellion, or inappropriate emotion to their parents. The toys themselves reflect the militaristic values that permeated even the play of aristocratic children. Miniature gladius swords, crafted with the same attention to detail as full-sized weapons, show evidence of actual combat use in training exercises that began as early as age 5. Tiny shields bear real battle damage, and child-sized armor found in the same rooms shows wear patterns consistent with serious martial training rather than ceremonial display. Perhaps most disturbing of all are the miniature torture devices found in this same villa, scaled-down versions of the instruments used to extract confessions from slaves and criminals. These were not macabre curiosities, but educational tools designed to familiarize aristocratic children with the methods of interrogation and punishment that they would one day be expected to employ as magistrates and military commanders. The bronze and iron implements show signs of use, suggesting that the children practiced these techniques on animals or perhaps on the household slaves who served as their tutors and companions. The discovery of child-sized shackles in several old Pompeian houses provides haunting evidence of the methods used to control and discipline Roman children. These restraints, forged with the same care and precision as adult versions, were apparently used to confine children who displayed unacceptable behavior or who failed to meet their parents' expectations. The wear patterns on the metal suggest frequent use, and the positioning of wall anchors indicates that children could be chained in place for extended periods as punishment for various infractions in the public areas of Pompeii. The evidence of childhood becomes even more complex and disturbing. The amphitheater contains a section specifically designated for children's gladiatorial games, where young Romans as early as age 8 participated in blood sports designed to accustom them to violence and death. The sand in this section bears chemical traces consistent with human blood, and the surrounding walls show impact damage from weapons and bodies thrown against them with considerable force. The forums and marketplaces reveal evidence of child slavery on a scale that defies modern comprehension. Auction blocks size for small bodies, advertisement inscriptions specifying the age and skills of child slaves, and price lists that reveal children were often sold for less than the cost of a quality horse or a well-bred dog. The legal documents preserved in Pompey's archives include contracts for the purchase and rental of children as young as 5, with detailed specifications for their working conditions and the punishments that could be inflicted for disobedience or unsatisfactory performance. Moving beyond Pompeii to other archaeological sites throughout the Roman world, the evidence of harsh childhood becomes even more widespread and systematic. In London, ancient Londinium, excavations beneath modern office buildings have revealed a Roman school where the walls bear the scratched names and complaints of students who suffered under the brutal educational methods of their time. Marcus hates his teacher, reads one inscription, while another records Gaius was beaten 7 times today for a poor recitation. The cemetery at York has yielded hundreds of child burials that tell stories of lives cut short by the demands of Roman society. Many skeletons show evidence of malnutrition despite being buried with expensive grave goods, suggesting that even wealthy families prioritized other concerns over their children's basic physical needs. Others bear the marks of violence, healed fractures that indicate systematic beating, blade wounds that suggest training accidents or deliberate injury, and deformity is consistent with being forced into unnatural positions for extended periods. In the frontier regions of the empire, where Roman families struggled to maintain their cultural identity in hostile environments, the archaeological evidence reveals even harsher approaches to child-rearing. German frontier forts contain child-sized military equipment that shows signs of actual combat use, suggesting that young Romans were pressed into service as soldiers when circumstances demanded. The cemetery at one such fort contains the remains of children as young as 10 who died from battle wounds, their small skeletons bearing the same types of injuries found among adult legionaries. The provincial cities of Gaul have yielded particularly disturbing evidence of the methods used to Romanize the children of conquered peoples. Schools built in the Roman style contain punishment cells designed for solitary confinement, where native children who resisted cultural assimilation could be isolated and broken of their traditional beliefs and practices. The walls of these cells bear scratched messages in local languages, desperate pleas for rescue or revenge that were never answered. Perhaps most haunting of all are the votive offerings found at temples throughout the Roman world. Tiny bronze hands and feet left by parents praying for their children's health and safety. But examination of these offerings reveals a disturbing pattern. Many are inscribed not with prayers for healing, but with requests for the gods to make children more obedient, more willing to accept pain, more capable of enduring the harsh realities of Roman life. Parents were literally praying for their children to be made harder, colder, and less sensitive to suffering. The workshops of toy manufacturers reveal the commercial side of this cultural approach to childhood. Mass-produced miniature weapons, training manuals for child gladiators, and instructional materials for teaching young children to accept and inflict pain were apparently profitable enough to support specialized craftsmen throughout the empire. The quality and attention to detail in these items suggest that there was significant demand for tools designed to eliminate childhood innocence and replace it with premature adult competence. Recent excavations in Rome itself have uncovered evidence of a thriving market in child entertainers, young slaves trained to perform increasingly dangerous and degrading acts for the amusement of adult audiences. The training facilities for these performers contain equipment designed to teach children to ignore pain, to suppress natural fear responses and to maintain composure while being subjected to physical and psychological abuse. The skeletal remains found in these locations show evidence of systematic torture and conditioning that would be recognized today as severe child abuse. The archaeological record also preserves evidence of the rare Romans who questioned these practices. A villa near Naples contains wall paintings that depict idealized scenes of gentle parent-child relationships, suggesting that some families may have attempted to create more nurturing environments for their children, but these examples are so rare as to prove the rule rather than contradict it, highlighting how unusual it was for Roman parents to prioritize their children's emotional well-being over their property. On for adult responsibilities, the preservation of organic materials at certain sites has allowed archaeologists to examine the actual books and educational materials used in Roman schools. These texts, written on papyrus and wooden tablets, reveal curricula focused almost exclusively on military tactics, legal procedures, and moral instruction designed to produce obedient citizens rather than creative thinkers. The children's exercises preserved in these materials show evidence of systematic indoctrination in Roman values, with heavy emphasis on the acceptability of violence and the importance of placing duty above personal desire. As we walk through these ruins in the fading light of day, examining the broken toys and reading the scratched complaints of children long dead, we begin to understand that the literary sources that describe Roman childhood may actually have understated rather than exaggerated the harsh realities of growing up in the ancient world. The archaeological evidence suggests a systematic approach to eliminating childhood that was more thorough, more widespread, and more successful than even the written accounts indicate. These silent witnesses speak of a civilization that valued strength above all else and was willing to sacrifice the happiness and innocence of its children to achieve the military and political dominance that made Rome master of the known world. In the vast necropolises that surround every Roman city, where marble monuments and humble stone markers stretch beyond the horizon like a forest of the dead, we find perhaps the most poignant and disturbing evidence of how Roman society viewed its children. These burial grounds, excavated by generations of archaeologists, reveal not only the statistical reality of childhood mortality in the ancient world, but also the emotional and psychological frameworks that Roman families used to cope with the loss of their young. The inscriptions carved into these tombstones speak with voices that transcend the centuries, offering glimpses into hearts that loved their children but were forced by circumstance and culture to expiate. Is that love in ways that would shock modern sensibilities. Picture yourself walking through the Isola Sacra necropolis near ancient Ostia as the morning mist rises from the Tiber, carrying with it the whispered secrets of 2,000 years. The white marble gleams pale in the early light, and everywhere you look, small tombstones mark the final resting places of children whose lives were measured not in decades, but in months and years. These are not the elaborate mausoleums of emperors and senators, but the modest memorials that ordinary Roman families erected for their lost children, and the messages they bear reveal a complex mixture of grief, resignation, and disturbing acceptance of childhood as a temporary and expendable state. The epitaph of 6-year-old Marcus Caecilius Felix reads simply, "He completed his service to the family." The phrase, so matter-of-fact in its finality, reflects the Roman understanding that children existed primarily to serve adult needs rather than to be cherished for their own sake. Young Marcus was not mourned as a unique individual whose potential was cut short, but rather as a family asset whose utility had ended. His parents' grief, while genuine, was expressed through the lens of economic and social calculation rather than pure emotional loss. Nearby stands the tomb of 8-year-old Gaius Valerius Optatus, whose epitaph includes the chilling phrase, "He bore his sufferings without complaint. This was considered the highest praise that could be offered for a child. An acknowledgement that the boy had successfully learned the most important lesson of Roman. Childhood that pain should be endured in silence, and that displays of weakness were shameful failures that brought dishonor upon the entire family. The parents who commissioned this inscription saw their son's stoic acceptance of whatever illness or injury killed him as his greatest achievement. More worthy of remembrance than any childish accomplishment or moment of joy, the grave marker of 10-year-old Julia Tertia tells an even more disturbing story through its careful omissions. The inscription lists her accomplishments in domestic skill spinning, weaving, the preparation of household medicines, but makes no mention of play, friendship, or happiness. This child was valued for her productivity rather than her personality, remembered for her usefulness rather than her laughter. The image carved below the text shows her at work rather than at play, standing solemnly at a loom with the posture of an adult worker rather than a child exploring her world. In the children's section of the campus Salutaris Cemetery in Rome, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of graves containing the remains of slave children whose short lives were devoted entirely to serving their master's needs. The epitaphs here are commissioned not by grieving parents, but by the owners who lost valuable property when these children died. Hermes, faithful cupbearer, 8 years old, never broke a dish, reads one inscription, while another commemorates Claudia, skilled masks, died at 9 years, gave excellent service. These children are remembered not as human beings but as tools whose efficiency and obedience justified the cost of their purchase and training. The tomb of 12-year-old Lucius Manicius Anthus provides insight into the brutal educational methods that Ciel aimed so many young lives. The epitaph proudly notes that he died from his wounds received in gladiatorial training, having shown great courage in the school. This child was not the victim of an accident, but rather the casualty of an educational system that deliberately exposed young people to mortal danger in order to prepare them for adult responsibilities. His parents' pride in his courage reflects their acceptance that his death was a reasonable price to pay for the character development that gladiatorial training supposedly provided. Perhaps most haunting of all are the collective graves of children who died during the harsh disciplinary measures that Roman schools employed as standard educational practice. A mass burial site near the remains of a prestigious academy in Gaul contains the skeletons of 37 children between the ages of 6 and 14, all showing evidence of severe beating injuries that proved fatal. The single monument erected over this grave bears the inscription, "They learned the ultimate lesson of obedience." The families who buried these children together saw their deaths not as tragedies to be prevented, but as inevitable consequences of the educational process that was necessary to produce properly disciplined Roman citizens. The graves of child gladiators reveal another dimension of Roman attitudes toward young people and violence. In the gladiatorial cemetery at Ephesus, excavators have found elaborate tombs commissioned by the trainers and sponsors who profited from the combat performances of children as young as 7. These inscriptions celebrate the entertainment value that these young fighters provided rather than mourning their lost potential or questioning the morality of forcing children to fight for adult amusement. Felix the Bold, 10 years old, died valiantly in the arena. Having pleased the crowd with 7 victories, reads one typical epitaph. The children's graves in military cemeteries throughout the empire tell stories of young lives consumed by the machinery of Roman expansion and conquest. At Hadrian's Wall, the burial ground of the 20th Legion contains the remains of children who served as messengers, servants, and auxiliary fighters in the campaign to subdue the British tribes. Their tombstones describe them not as victims of adult wars, but as willing participants in the glorious enterprise of imperial expansion. Gaius Flavius Maximus, age 11, died courageously carrying dispatches through enemy territory, represents A typical example of how these child casualties were commemorated. The chemical analysis of children's remains from various Roman cemeteries has revealed systematic patterns of malnutrition and poisoning that suggest deliberate deprivation was used. As a method of character building, children from wealthy families show evidence of controlled starvation designed to teach them to endure hardship. While the bones of young slaves contain traces of toxic substances apparently administered to Tess, their resistance to assassination attempts that they might one day face as adult servants to powerful masters. The grave goods buried with Roman children provide additional evidence of the culture's approach to childhood and death. Unlike the toys and comfort objects that modern families might place with a deceased child, Roman graves typically contain miniature weapons, work tools, and religious implements that reflect adult expectations rather than childish preferences. A 7-year-old girl might be buried with a set of surgical instruments if she was being trained as a healer, while boys as young as 5 were interred with small swords and armor that they had used in their martial education. The seasonal patterns of child burials reveal the deliberate exposure of unwanted infants to the elements as a form of population control that was both legal and socially acceptable. Winter months show dramatic spikes in infant mortality that correlate not with disease patterns but with economic pressures that made additional mouths to feed particularly unwelcome. The discovery of mass graves containing hundreds of newborn skeletons outside major cities provides archaeological confirmation of the literary sources that describe routine infanticide as a normal aspect of Roman family planning. The cemetery at Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic eruption that buried the city, offers unique insights into the immediate circumstances of children's deaths and their families' responses. Many child graves show evidence of hasty burial, suggesting that parents were more concerned with disposing of bodies quickly than with elaborate mourning rituals. The volcanic ash that filled these graves has preserved organic materials that reveal children were often buried wearing their everyday work clothes rather than special garments, indicating that they were valued more for their practical contributions than for their symbolic importance as family members. The inscriptions on family tombs often list children alongside household slaves and valuable animals, reflecting their status as property rather than independent individuals worthy of special consideration. A typical wealthy family's monument might commemorate Gaius Cornelius Maximus, his wife Claudia, his horse Pegasus, his dog Cherus, his slave Hermes, and his son Marcus, with no distinction made between the child and the other possessions that the father accumulated during his lifetime. Recent discoveries in the Roman provinces have revealed evidence of systematic programs to toughen children through exposure to extreme environmental conditions. In Germania, archaeologists have found the remains of Roman settlement schools where children were deliberately housed in unheated buildings during winter months, fed minimal rations, and required to perform heavy labor in harsh weather conditions. The mortality rates at these institutions approached 50%. But this was considered an acceptable price for producing adults capable of surviving in the demanding frontier regions of the empire. The personal effects found in children's graves often include items that would be considered inappropriate or disturbing in modern contexts. Medical instruments for performing surgery, torture devices for extracting information from prisoners, and poison testing equipment for protecting future masters from assassination attempts were communal. Why buried with children who had been trained in these specialized skills? These grave goods reflect the Roman belief that childhood should be a period of intensive preparation for adult responsibilities rather than a time of protection and nurturing. The artistic representations on children's tombstones consistently emphasize adult themes and concerns rather than the playful imagery that might be expected in memorials for young people. Children are depicted in formal poses wearing adult clothing and expressions engaged in serious Activities rather than games or exploration. The few images that show children at play invariably depict competitive activities with clear winners and losers rather than the cooperative or imaginative play that characterizes healthy childhood. Development. The geographical distribution of child graves throughout the Roman Empire reveals consistent patterns of harsh treatment regardless of local customs or traditions. From Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. The archaeological evidence suggests that Roman approaches to childhood were systematically imposed on conquered populations as part of the cultural transformation that accompanied political domination. Native traditions of child-rearing were suppressed in favor of Roman methods that prioritized discipline and utility over emotional well-being and individual development. As we stand among these silent monuments in the gathering dusk, reading the harsh epitaphs and examining the disturbing grave goods, we begin to understand that Roman childhood was not simply different from our modern experience, but was deliberately designed to eliminate the qualities that we now consider essential to healthy human development. These children were not failed adults, but rather successful products of a system that valued strength over sensitivity, obedience over creativity, and utility over happiness. Their tombstones stand as monuments not only to their brief lives, but to a civilization that was willing to sacrifice the innocence and joy of childhood in pursuit of the disciplined efficiency that built and maintained the greatest empire the ancient world had ever known. In the workshops and refuse heaps of ancient Rome, archaeologists have uncovered a treasure trove of children's playthings that reveal the disturbing extent to which Roman society used even recreation and amusement as tools for indoctrinating young minds into accepting violence, hierarchy, and the harsh realities of imperial life. These toys, crafted with the same attention to detail and quality that marked Roman military equipment and architectural achievements, served not as escapes from adult reality, but as miniature training grounds where children learned to embrace the values and behaviors that would define their adult roles in Roman society. Picture yourself standing in the restored workshop of Gaius Fabricius Dolabella, a toy maker whose business thrived in the commercial district of Pompeii during the final decades before Vesuvius Destru. Yet the city's the wooden shelves that line the walls display an array of miniature objects that would make modern parents recoil in horror. Yet these items were among the most popular and expensive playthings available to Roman children. Here, crafted with meticulous attention to realistic detail, are tiny gladiuses with edges sharp enough to draw blood. Miniature torture devices that function exactly like their full-size counterparts. And elaborate doll houses that depict not scenes of domestic harmony, a tableau of slavery, punishment, and social control. The most popular items in Dolabella's inventory were the gladiator set's collections of miniature fighters, weapons, and arena accessories that allowed children to stage their own blood sports in faithful reproduction of them, public spectacles that formed such an important part of Roman entertainment culture. These were not the sanitized action figures of modern toy manufacture, but anatomically correct representations of real gladiators, complete with scars, missing limbs, and expressions of pain and terror that had been carefully studied and reproduced by skilled artisans. The gladiator figures themselves were cast in bronze and painted with pigments that realistically depicted blood, bruises, and wounds. The weapons they carried were functional miniatures, tiny nets that could actually entangle, small tridents with points sharp enough to pierce flesh, and swords that, while reduced in scale, maintained the proper weight distribution and balance of full-sized military equipment. Children who played with these toys learned not only the techniques of combat, but also the psychological attitudes that made such violence acceptable and even entertaining. The arena accessories that accompanied these gladiator sets included miniature torture devices for punishing fighters who showed cowardice, tiny medical instruments for treating wounds between combats, and elaborate mechanisms for disposing of the bodies of defeated gladiators. Children learn to operate these devices with the same clinical efficiency that characterized adult arena management, developing the emotional detachment that would allow them to enjoy watching real human beings suffer and die for their amusement. The dollhouses popular among wealthy Roman girls present an even more disturbing picture of childhood indoctrination when examined closely. These elaborate miniature homes, crafted from precious woods and decorated with ivory and gold inlays, depicted not the idealized domestic scenes that modern doll houses might feature, but realistic representations of Roman household management, complete with slave quarters, punishment chambers, and detailed scenes of domestic violence and sexual exploitation. The miniature furniture in these dollhouses included tiny shackles for restraining disobedient slaves, small torture devices for extracting confessions from household staff, and elaborate bedroom sets that depicted the sexual relationships between masters and their human property in explicit detail. Girls who played with these toys learned not only the practical skills of household management, but also the moral framework that made the exploitation and abuse of other human beings seem natural and necessary. The slave figures that populated these dollhouses were crafted with the same attention to realistic detail as the gladiator sets, complete with brands, scars, and expressions of submissive terror that reflected the actual conditions of slavery in Roman households. These figures could be positioned in various scenarios that taught young girls how to maintain discipline among their future human property, how to punish infractions, and how to extract maximum labor from unwilling workers. The board games popular among Roman children reflected the same emphasis on competition, domination, and the acceptance of others' suffering that characterized their other recreational activities. The game of Ludus Latrunculorum, often called Little Soldiers, required players to capture and eliminate their opponent's pieces through strategic warfare. But the rules specifically rewarded cruelty and discouraged mercy. Players earned extra points for torturing captured pieces before removing them from the board, and the game included detailed rules for simulating the execution of prisoners and the enslavement of survivors. Even more disturbing was the popularity of Ludus Mortuorum, the game of the dead, which required players to navigate their pieces through scenarios based on actual Roman military campaigns, complete with opportunities to massacre civilian populations, enslave prisoners of war, and destroy enemy cities. The game board depicted famous battles in graphic detail, with painted scenes of crucifixions, mass executions, and the systematic rape and pillage that accompanied Roman conquests. Children who mastered this game learned not only military tactics, but also the moral indifference that made such atrocities seem like acceptable consequences of imperial expansion. The musical instruments designed for Roman children served similar educational purposes, though their lessons were often more subtle than those taught by toys and games. The tibia, small flutes carved from human bones, were among the most prized instruments for young musicians, and their construction required children to understand and accept the reality of death in ways that would shock modern sensibilities. Children learned to play melodies on instruments made from the remains of executed criminals, war casualties, and abandoned infants, developing a casual familiarity with mortality that prepared them for the violent realities of adult life. The religious toys popular among Roman children included miniature altars for practicing blood sacrifice, tiny knives for performing ritual executions, and elaborate sets of votive offerings that depicted various forms of suffering and death. Children learned to conduct mock religious ceremonies that involved the simulated torture and killing of small animals or dolls, developing the psychological attitudes that would allow them to participate in actual religious violence. As adults, the construction sets available to Roman boys included not the creative building blocks that modern children might enjoy, but rather detailed models of siege engines, fortifications, and military equipment that taught practical lessons in warfare and destruction. These sets included working catapults that could actually launch projectiles, battering rams that could break down miniature walls, and siege towers that could be used to scale model fortifications. Boys who mastered these toys learned not only engineering principles, but also the applications of technology to the destruction of human life and property. The chemical analysis of paint and dyes used in Roman toys reveals the systematic inclusion of toxic substances that had no practical purpose other than to accustom children to handling dangerous materials. Lead-based paints were used not because they provided better color coverage, but because they taught children to work with poisons that they might later need to use against political enemies or rebellious slaves. Mercury compounds were included in toy decorations not for their aesthetic properties, but to help children develop tolerance for the heavy metal poisoning that was common among those who worked in Roman mining operations. The discovery of toy making tools in children's graves suggests that many young Romans were expected to manufacture their own playthings, learning skills that would prepare them for adult occupations in weapon making, torture device construction, and other crafts essential to imperial administration. These tools, sized for small hands but capable of producing functional weapons and implements of torture, represent perhaps the most disturbing evidence of how thoroughly Roman society integrated violence and cruelty into every aspect of childhood experience. The quality and expense of Roman toys reflected their importance as educational tools rather than mere entertainment. Wealthy families might spend the equivalent of a slave's annual purchase price on a single, elaborate toy set, understanding that these items represented investments in their children's future competence as Roman citizens. The most expensive toys were often passed down through generations, accumulating layers of modification and addition that reflected the evolving educational needs of successive children. The geographic distribution of Roman toy types throughout the empire reveals systematic efforts to use play as a tool of cultural transformation in conquered territories. Native toy-making traditions were systematically suppressed and replaced with Roman designs that taught children to accept imperial values and behaviors. Archaeological evidence from Britain, Gaul, and Germania shows the rapid disappearance of traditional Celtic and Germanic toys in favor of Roman designs that emphasized competition, violence, and social hierarchy. The seasonal patterns of toy production and distribution suggest that Roman society deliberately timed the introduction of certain types of playthings to coincide with children's developmental stages. Infants were given toys that taught basic concepts of dominance and submission. Toddlers received more complex items that introduced ideas about social hierarchy and acceptable violence. And older children progressed to sophisticated toys that provided practical training in adult skills and responsibilities. The preservation of organic materials at certain archaeological sites has allowed researchers to examine the instruction manuals that accompanied complex Roman toys. These documents, written on papyrus and wooden tablets, provide detailed guidance for parents and teachers on how to use playthings as educational tools. The manuals emphasize the importance of ensuring that children understand the serious purpose behind their play, that they learn to associate pleasure with activities that prepare them for adult responsibilities, and that they develop the psychological attitudes necessary for success in Roman society. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of toy testing facilities where Roman educators systematically studied the effects of different playthings on children's psychological development. These institutions, funded by wealthy families and government officials, conducted controlled experiments to determine which toys most effectively eliminated childhood sensitivity and replaced it with adult ruthlessness. The detailed records of these experiments preserved on wax tablets and papyrus scrolls, provide shocking insights into the systematic nature of Roman efforts to engineer childhood experience. The international trade in Roman toys reveals the extent to which these educational tools spread throughout the ancient world, carrying Roman values and methods far beyond the empire's political boundaries. Merchants exported Roman toy designs to India, China, and sub-Saharan Africa, spreading Roman approaches to childhood education among peoples who had never experienced direct imperial rule. The discovery of Roman-style toys in these distant regions suggests that Roman concepts of childhood were adopted voluntarily by foreign elites who recognized their effectiveness in producing disciplined, capable adults. As we examine these disturbing artifacts in the quiet of the museum storage rooms where they are preserved, handling the tiny weapons and miniature torture devices with the care their age and fragility demand, we begin to understand that Roman childhood was shaped by a systematic program of indoctrination that used every available tool, including play itself, to eliminate natural human tendencies toward compassion, creativity, and joy. These toys were not the innocent diversions of a more violent age, but rather carefully designed instruments of psychological conditioning that transformed children into the efficient, ruthless adults that Roman society required for its continued dominance over the ancient world. Now let us ascend from the common streets and modest workshops to the marble halls and manicured gardens of Rome's most powerful families, where the children of senators, generals, and emperors lived lives that might appear privileged to modern eyes, but which carried burdens and terrors that would horrify contemporary parents. These young aristocrats, born into wealth and position that guaranteed them every material comfort, inhabited a world where luxury served as both protection and prison, where their elevated status made them targets rather than beneficiaries of special consideration. As our journey through the harsh landscape of Roman childhood draws to its close, and you settle more deeply into the comfort of your modern surroundings, let us take a moment to reflect on the vast distance we have traveled, not merely through space and time, but through fundamentally different ways of understanding what it means to be human, what it means to be a child, and what price civilizations are willing to pay for greatness. The voices we have heard echoing from across the centuries, the cries of children in training, the whispered prayers of young slaves, the calculated conversations of aristocratic families speak to us of a world so alien to our own experience that it might seem like the product of dark imagination rather than historical reality. Yet the evidence we have examined, from the archaeological fragments scattered across the ruins of empire to the literary accounts preserved in dusty manuscripts, confirms that Roman childhood was indeed shaped by systematic approaches to human development that prioritized the needs of the state above the welfare of individuals, that valued strength above happiness, and that willingly sacrificed the innocence and joy of the young in pursuit of the disciplined efficiency that built and maintained the greatest empire the ancient world had ever known. These were not the accidental cruelties of a more primitive age, but the deliberate choices of a sophisticated civilization that understood exactly what kind of adults it needed to achieve its ambitions and was prepared to use any means necessary to produce them. The Roman children whose lives we have explored were not failed modern children, but rather successful products of a system designed to create human beings capable of extraordinary vehemence at extraordinary cost. The boy who learned to endure beatings without complaint became the general who could order the crucifixion of thousands without hesitation. The girl who mastered household management through the abuse of slave children became the matron who could efficiently organize the exploitation of entire provinces. The young aristocrat who learned to suppress natural empathy for the suffering of others became the senator who could debate the merits of genocide with academic detachment. These transformations were not accidents but achievements, carefully planned and methodically executed by families and institutions that had learned through centuries of experience how to forge human material into the shapes that imperial administration required. The cruelty we have witnessed was not sadistic, pleasure in causing pain, but rather the systematic application of pressure designed to eliminate weaknesses that might interfere with adult effectiveness. Roman civilization had discovered that certain kinds of greatness could only be achieved by certain kinds of people, and it was willing to create those people through methods that we would recognize today as systematic child abuse, the archaeological evidence. We have examined the miniature weapons and torture devices, the child-sized shackles and training implements. The tombstones with their harsh epitaphs and disturbing grave goods provide silent testimony to the thoroughness with which Roman society pursued this transformation of its young. Every toy was designed to teach a lesson about power and submission, every game structured to reinforce hierarchies of dominance and control. Every educational exercise crafted to eliminate natural human tendencies toward cooperation and compassion that might interfere with the ruthless competition that drove imperial expansion. The contrast between Roman childhood and our modern experience reveals not merely different approaches to education and child-rearing, but fundamentally different understandings of human nature and social responsibility, where we see children as individuals with inherent rights to protection, nurturing, and the gradual development of their unique capabilities. Romans saw raw material to be shaped according to predetermined specifications. Potential adults whose value lay not in their personal happiness, but in their future utility to family and state. The slave children whose experiences we have witnessed remind us that Roman attitudes toward childhood were inseparable from broader systems of exploitation and dehumanization that treated human beings as property to be bought, sold, and disposed of according to economic convenience. The education provided to these young slaves often superior to that available to free children of lower classes served not to liberate them, but to make them more valuable assets, more effective tools for advancing their master's interests, while denying them any opportunity for personal fulfillment or independent development. The aristocratic children whose luxurious but terrifying lives we have explored illustrate the paradox that wealth and privilege in the Roman world brought not freedom but additional burdens, not protection but exposure to more sophisticated forms of pressure and control. These young elites lived in golden cages where every comfort was provided except the most basic human need for unconditional love and acceptance, where every educational advantage was offered except the opportunity to develop their own values and make their own choices about the kind of people they wanted to become. The religious dimension of Roman childhood that we have examined reveals how thoroughly the culture integrated its harsh approach just to human development with cosmic justification, teaching children that the gods themselves demanded the systematic elimination of weakness and the cultivation of strength. The household spirits who watched over family life were not benevolent protectors but demanding supervisors who expected perfect performance from even the youngest family members. While the public deities who governed Roman state religion explicitly favored those who could demonstrate their worthiness through the successful domination of others, the educational methods that shaped young Roman minds were designed not to encourage creativity and critical thinking, but to produce citizens capable of flawless execution of predetermined roles within a rigid social hierarchy. The rhetorical training that occupied so much of aristocratic education taught children not to seek truth, but to argue effectively for whatever position served their interests, while the military education that prepared boys for command emphasized not the protection of the innocent, but the efficient application of violence to achieve strategic objectives. As we consider the long-term consequences of these approaches to childhood development, we begin to understand how the Roman Empire was able to achieve such remarkable stability and expansion over so many centuries. The adults produced by this harsh system possessed qualities that were ideally suited to the demands of imperial administration: absolute obedience to authority, indifference to the suffering of others, and the ability to make difficult decisions based on practical rather than emotional considerations. These were precisely the characteristics that enabled Roman legions to conquer the known world and Roman administrators to govern diverse populations across vast distances with minimal resources and maximum efficiency. Yet the same system that produced such effective administrators and military commanders also created human beings who were incapable of the kinds of relationships and experiences that we now recognize as essential to psychological health and personal fulfillment. The Roman elite who governed the empire were powerful and competent, but also isolated and emotionally crippled, capable of great achievements, but incapable of genuine intimacy or spontaneous joy. They had traded their humanity for effectiveness, their capacity for love for their ability to command. The legacy of Roman approaches to childhood extends far beyond the collapse of the empire itself, influencing educational and child-rearing practices throughout European history and continuing to shape contemporary debates about the proper balance between nurturing and discipline in human development. The military academies and elite boarding schools that have trained European leaders for centuries drew heavily on Roman models, while the Industrial Revolution's use of child labor reflected similar assumptions about the expendability of young lives in pursuit of economic progress. Even today, as we congratulate ourselves on the more humane treatment of children in modern democratic societies, we can recognize echoes of Roman attitudes in competitive educational systems that prioritize achievement over emotional well-being, in sports programs that value victory over character development, and in economic systems that sacrifice the interests of future generations for immediate advantage. The fundamental tension between individual welfare and collective achievement that characterized Roman childhood continues to influence our own approaches to raising and educating young people. The archaeological record that preserves evidence of Roman childhood practices serves as both a window into a vanished world and a mirror that reflects our own values and assumptions about human development. The miniature weapons and training devices that we find so disturbing were once cherished possessions, carefully crafted by skilled artisans and lovingly given to children by parents who believed they were providing the best possible preparation for adult life. The harsh epitaphs on children's tombstones expressed genuine grief filtered through cultural frameworks that value different qualities than those we now consider most precious in the young. As you drift towards sleep tonight, surrounded by the comfort and safety that modern life provides, you can perhaps find peace in understanding that the harsh realities we have explored together are safely locked in the past. That the children whose struggles we have witnessed are now beyond the reach of further suffering, and that the choices made by Roman families and institutions 2,000 years ago need not constrain the decisions we make about how to raise and educate the young people in our own communities. The Roman Empire that demanded such sacrifices from its children eventually collapsed, its military might and administrative efficiency proving insufficient to sustain a civilization built on such systematic dehumanization. The children who suffered to create that empire have been dust for centuries, their pain ended, their struggles finished. Their brief lives now serving only as lessons for those of us who have inherited a world where different choices about childhood and human development have become possible dots in the gentle darkness that surrounds you now. You can rest assured that the modern children sleeping safely in their beds tonight will wake to possibilities that Roman children could never have imagined. The possibility of being valued for their inherent worth rather than their future utility. The possibility of being loved unconditionally rather than conditionally. And the possibility of developing into whatever kind of people their own hearts and minds lead them to become. The long shadow cast by ancient choices need not determine our own. And the voices that called to us from across the centuries can finally rest in the peace that comes from being heard and understood. Their warnings heeded and their suffering acknowledged in the service of a more gentle future.